All right. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll get started. It may be that some people join us in progress. I want to take this moment to welcome everyone. My name is Christine Freeman Roth. I'm principal of Lady Eaton College, and I'd like to begin this evening by respectfully acknowledging that Trent is on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. Before we get started this evening, I just want to let you know a little bit about how we're using Zoom tonight. This is a Zoom webinar, which means that you can see our speakers, but you are not yourself on camera. At the bottom of your screen, you will see that we have enabled the Q&A feature, the question and answer feature. This will allow you to post questions you might have for our speaker during or after his talk, and we will do our best to have him address those questions at the end this evening. You will also see a chat feature. You can send a message to the panelists if you have a question about Zoom or are looking for some more information from any of us. But we have disabled the feature that allows you to chat amongst yourselves. Tonight, it is our hope that you will give our speaker your full attention. We are filming this evening's talk, and as soon as we are able, we will post the recording on our Lady Eaton College Zoom YouTube channel. It may take us some time to review the closed captioning, but we will get it posted as soon as we are able. Tonight, I'm just double checking. No, we have not. This probably goes without saying, but some, likely many of the images you see tonight and the stories you hear may be disturbing. If you have young children with you, wherever you are, you may wish to listen to this talk with headphones. On the other hand, you may have intentionally invited your older children to listen to our speaker tonight, to hear our speaker's truth, and they are most welcome. I am so pleased that so many have chosen to join us this evening to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day, officially this year on Thursday, April 8th. The motto of Lady Eaton College, one of the colleges of Trent University, is Sapiente e Humanitas, wisdom and humanity. At Lady Eaton College, we pursue knowledge and wisdom of all kinds, but not only for the sake of knowing. We seek knowledge and understanding to make a difference, to build a wiser, more humane, more compassionate world. Remembering our history and understanding that such atrocities can only take place when otherwise good people stand by and allow them to happen are key to preventing them from happening again. We are very lucky at Lady Eaton College to be home to the Department of History. And I am very pleased tonight to introduce Dr. Carolyn Kay, professor in the Department of History and fellow of Lady Eaton College. Her research includes the impact of World War I on German children, the history of arts education for children in Imperial Germany, the ideals of childhood in Imperial Germany as seen in advice literature by experts in medicine, psychology, and pedagogy, and children in the Holocaust. Professor Carolyn Kay teaches courses in modern German history and history of the Holocaust, and she is the recipient of the 2007 Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations Teaching Award and the 2005 Simons Teaching Award recipient at Trent University. On a more personal note, I was very lucky to work in Lady Eaton College as senior tutor and then academic advisor while Carolyn was principal. And when I took on the role of principal myself, I very much wanted to continue her legacy of inviting Holocaust survivors to speak at Lady Eaton. Thank you, Carolyn, for being such a great role model, teacher, and friend, and for starting such an important tradition at Lady Eaton College. I would like to invite you now to introduce our speaker for this evening.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine, for those lovely words and for your part in arranging for Max to speak today. This is just a wonderful and important event. It is my honor to introduce my friend, Max Eisen, and one of Canada's most illustrious citizens. I personally think he should be the next Governor General of Canada, so I might be putting in a nomination for you, Max. In 1992, at the age of 63, Max began speaking about his personal experiences in the Holocaust. Since that time, he has traveled across Canada, speaking to tens of thousands of students, Canadians from all walks of life, professional groups, about the Holocaust. And Max is a regular speaker for the Toronto Holocaust Center and also the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Of course, under COVID, it's been very difficult for him to speak in person to people, but he's doing this now via Zoom. He has also taken part in the past in the March of the Living Trips to Poland, where students and also professional groups can see some of the memorials of the Holocaust and visit camps like Auschwitz with a survivor and experience an event that is forever going to change them. And some of the people listening today have been on those March of the Living Trips. At Trent University, Max has spoken several times, and the attendance has always been record-breaking. The last time we had to put people in extra rooms, there were so many people. It was just extraordinary, and people talked about how wonderful it was that Max gave such a moving talk for months afterwards. It was really superb. At age 87, Max wrote his memoir. Those of you trying to write a book, don't give up. And this is the wonderful book that you should all have a copy of by chance alone, because it is extraordinary. It was released in 2016 by HarperCollins and to critical acclaim. It won the CBC Canada Reads Award, which is a very hard thing to win. And it was shortlisted for the prestigious RBC Taylor Award for Nonfiction. It has also been released in the United States and is getting, again, great reviews there. As well, in 2015 and 2016, Max provided testimony for two important and very closely watched trials of Auschwitz guards, trials that were held in Germany, and he was a key witness in both of these trials. His participation was followed by the Canadian press, and the second trial, which involved a man named Oscar Groning, is the subject of a documentary film called The Accountant of Auschwitz. And Max features significantly in that film. It's on CBC Gem. So those of you who've downloaded the app can watch the film. It's really something. For his advocacy of Holocaust education, Max has received many awards, including honorary degrees from Trent, Western, and the University of Saskatchewan, as well as the Law Society of Ontario. But I would like to point out that Trent was the first to give Max an honorary doctorate. Just goes to show how wise we are. We started a trend. Finally, Max has had a hologram done. A very interesting and lengthy process, as I understand it. This has been completed done by the Steven Spielberg Shoah Foundation in California, and it ensures that there will be a hologram of Max for decades, indeed centuries to come, so that students can continue to learn about the Holocaust from Max's experience. And these holograms, as I understand it, will be made available in the US Holocaust Museum and at Yad Vashem and other museums on the Holocaust. So this is incredible. Max is a tireless educator for the learning about the Holocaust. And every person I know that has ever heard him speak has said that hearing him has really changed so much in their understanding of the Holocaust. And I've had lots of students say that they read tons of books and they took courses, but nothing compared to meeting Max and hearing him speak. So you're in for a treat. And I do want to point out that today is Max and Ivy's, Ivy is Max's wife, their 69th wedding anniversary. He just told us this. So how incredible it is. Yes, we all applaud you, Max and Ivy. How incredible it is that he's here with us today. Please join me in welcoming the remarkable Max Eisen.
Thank you, Carolyn. Really, Trent is, I have a very warm spot for Trent. Ever since I first met Carolyn, I've only had amazing experiences at Trent University. It's my alma mater, and it is true that this was the first honor and the most important one. So I want to start with my story, what happened to Jewish people in continental Europe. And this week we are remembering according to the Jewish calendar, on the 8th, we remember the Holocaust. In Hebrew, we say Yom HaShoah. Shoah, we call the Holocaust the Shoah, which means a catastrophe. And in Israel, on the 8th, at 11 o'clock in the morning, the sirens will sound right across the country for 2 minutes. Everything goes silent. Traffic on the highways, on the sidewalks comes to a stop for a 2-minute contemplation. And it's perhaps a sound, I've heard it several times when I was in Israel during this period of time. It is truly an awakening. Those 2 minutes are very important, remembering the past and what we are experiencing today. So my speech today will be about the past and some things that I'm very concerned about the present. And all this started with words. How do I go? Excuse me just one sec. Got it? How do I go back? Okay, thank you. So what happened in Europe? It started with words. Words are very powerful. Once they are put out, they can never be taken back. And it ended in horrible places. Jews came under pressure when the Nazi government, when Hitler entered parliament in 1933. By 1935, they came up with racial laws against the Jewish people, which were numerous, what Jews can and cannot do. They had this powerful Nazi ideology that anyone with racial features, religious beliefs, who did not fit into the mold of the master race was to be simply eliminated from the face of the world. They had a ministry of propaganda. Germany, the most cultured country in Europe, in the old cultured world of Europe, as we say, had a ministry of propaganda and a massive apparatus of deception. And the minister of propaganda was a Dr. Goebbels, who said that he had this amazing instrument. So Jews were demonized, dehumanized, they were called subhuman. In recent conflicts, the Tutsis were called cockroaches. They're to be squashed away, Yazidis and others. So those were times when the government controlled the entire media, the newspaper, the news, and the lies became the truth. There's Dr. Goebbels with his microphone, and he said he had this sophisticated machine. 24/7, this poison was put into the air. Can you imagine what you can do with cell phones today? This poison can be sent across the globe in a matter of seconds. And Jews were depicted as subhumans, communists, money grabbers. Posters, documentaries were made about these subhumans. And by 1935, these racial laws came out. And the first item was by the brown shirts of the SS. They stood in front of Jewish stores and they held up these flags. And it said, "Kauf nicht von Juden," do not buy from Jews. And in many cases, they simply painted it with white paint or other color paints on the store window. So this was a boycott of Jewish stores. Jews were boycotted. They couldn't sit on park benches unless it was marked for Jews. They could only shop at 7 o'clock in the evening. Jewish teachers, professors couldn't teach in university, and Jewish students could not attend public school or university. And eventually they were divested of their worldly possessions, of their livelihood, their businesses, their manufacturing companies, their practices, professional practices, their bank accounts, their artwork. So, and eventually they were sanctioned. They put them on trains and sent them to camps in Germany, Buchenwald, Dachau, Sachsenhausen. And 1938, November, Hitler threw the gloves down. There was an evening event. It was called the Night of Broken Glass, Kristallnacht. Every single synagogue was burned to the ground in Germany. They claimed that this was a movement. It was a spontaneous act. Although every fire department was warned days before that they had to be on the street, not to put out the fires of the synagogues, but to make sure that the fires did not spread to neighboring buildings. So that was November 1938. And in 1938, my country, Czechoslovakia, where I came under the Nazi heel. Hitler demanded part of my country, the Sudeten part. And we Jews, we knew that we were in mortal danger. And by 1938, it was very difficult for Jews to leave. And it was even more difficult for other countries to accept Jews. So after the Sudeten part was detached, a few months later, Nazi troops crossed the demarcation line. They entered Prague, and Czechoslovakia was partitioned into 3 parts. Bohemia, Moravia was called the Protectorate of the German Reich. In the center, there was a country of Slovakia under a Roman Catholic priest, Dr. Tiso. And in that part in Slovakia was my maternal family lived there. The larger part of my family lived in Slovakia. And where I lived with my paternal side of the family, we were given to Hungary. We are all ethnic Hungarians. We spoke Hungarian at home. I learned Slovak when I started school. And March 15, 1939, Hungarian troops arrived in our town, and the Slovak police, bureaucracy, and teachers left, and they were replaced by Hungarian teachers. gendarmes and bureaucrats. So our life became an upside down kind of a world. Systematically, our businesses were confiscated. My father had a drinking place. It was called a cellar, where people used to come down to the cellar. It had a huge vaulted ceiling. They used to have a drink of Slivovitz or vodka. They came there and they socialized. Somebody simply walked into my father's establishment and he said, "I need the keys to your business and you're out." This was simply that simple. In the town where I lived, there were approximately 90 Jewish families. It was a beautiful rural town. There was a Roman Catholic church, a Protestant church, and a synagogue. We had a Hebrew school with a beautifully organized Jewish community. Jews practically made the town work. There were 2 Jewish doctors, a dentist, a Jewish shoemaker, a couple of pubs, Jewish farmers and business people, small businesses. And it's systematically every day there were these edicts were posted in my town. You had to go and read it. And the next edicts were that Jews cannot have a bicycle or a radio. So I had to take my bicycle down to town hall. My father had a crystal radio. We had to turn it in. And it became worse. An edict came out that Jewish men from 18 to 45 had to report to labor battalions. So that included my father, my uncle. My paternal family, we lived in a large house, 3 families, my paternal grandparents, my grandfather, grandmother, and they had a daughter, Bella. She was an invalid. And my uncle and his wife, they had no children, and my parents, and I had 2 younger siblings, 2 young boys, and eventually I had a little sister. She was born in 1943. So it was a wonderful way of growing up. My grandfather truly was my role model. So when my father and uncle were gone, grandfather was ruling over this house. His word was the law. Any major decision that was made by the family, it had to have my grandfather's stamp on it. And my grandfather was a man who was a man of the land. He was a non-commissioned officer in the cavalry of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He knew animals. And we had a large orchard. He knew how to graft and prune trees, and I was his helper. In essence, my grandfather taught me many, many life skills. And one thing that he hammered into my head, no matter what I had to do, I had to be the best at it. And years later, all these things, had I not had those skills, I don't know how he would have survived a camp in Auschwitz and other places for a year. And in 1942, my maternal family, we could not keep in touch with our maternal family in Slovakia after this partition happened. We could only write a postcard once in a while. We received a telegram that my maternal family from Slovakia disappeared. Jews simply disappeared in Europe. 1942 was a time when the Nazi Reich were at the apex of their glory. We were devastated. My grandmother, I didn't know my grandfather on my mother's side. He died before I was born. But my grandmother and 2 of her sons, Pavel and Herman, they ran this big farm with dairy, cows and sheep and goats, and they made specialty cheeses. Every year I used to meet my cousins at my grandmother's farm. Never saw them after 1938, after the partition. And I spoke about the deception. A few months after they disappeared, we received a postcard, and it said, General Government, you see, Poland, after it was attacked in 1939, was no longer called Poland, it was called General Government. The message on the back of this postcard was, we, the Friedman family, we're all here together. We're working on farms and we are awaiting your arrival. Can you imagine, 1942? Several other families received similar postcards, and the elders were speaking to each other, and they said, could this be true? And we had to accept it as true, hoping that they're somewhere near Lublin. The stamp on the post, on this postcard said Lublin District. I found out years later what really happened. They were deported to a death camp called Majdanek near Lublin in 1942, and immediately gassed, murdered. So before they were murdered, they had to write postcards to their families in Hungary. You see how they were planning 2 years ahead of how they're going to handle Hungarian Jewry. So that was 1942. My Aunt Bella, who was an invalid, I remember her sitting in a chair in my grandparents' quarters. She was reading books all the time, and I said, little child, I was sitting on her lap, and I was amazed at all these stories that she was telling me and the pictures in these books. She taught me how to read. And when I was 6 years old, I read all the books by Jules Verne, and she taught me a love of books. Aunt Bella died in 1943. And in hindsight, it was truly a gift from God. I cannot imagine how we would have dealt with her just a year down the road when we were deported from our home. So that was 1943. There was death, and there was birth. My mother gave birth to a little girl in August of 1943, and that was not a good year for a Jewish mother or a Jewish child to be born. She was a beautiful little girl. There were 3 boys, and this little girl appeared. In the meantime, living under the Hungarians, our teachers came from Hungary. They were terrible anti-Semites, haters of Jews. We had a lot of physical punishment. We were wearing a yellow star. We were made to sit in the back row of the classroom. We were segregated in the back row of the classroom. We Jewish kids had to fight our way into school every morning. We were less than 10% of the student body. And, we had to fight through. We didn't win many battles, but we had this tough experience. And I was 12 and a half years old. I was thrown out of school with a few other Jewish kids. And my mother, in her wisdom, took me to the capital city of our province called Kassa in Hungarian, Košice in Slovak, and I became an apprentice. Apprentice, you do 4 works of apprenticeship to learn a trade. It happened to be a fur shop in Košice, which was a large city. It had a tram, it had streetcars, and it was a different world. I lived in a town that was horse and buggy. There was a taxi, there was a bus that went through, but Košice was a different world. And I managed to learn a lot more work skills and life skills. And then 1944 came. So before I get into 1944, I just want to backtrack. I want to continue with this boycott. What this boycott, divestment, and sanctions mean. You see, you need to remember they had a powerful propaganda machine and the Ministry of Deception. The Nazis did not tell the Jews in Europe that we're going to take you to the east and kill you. They said we're going to resettle you in the east. So, and lo and behold, we in North America, we have now this called BDS movement. This is something against Israel, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So what the meaning of boycott, divestment, and sanctions actually is, boycott means excommunication, divestment means expulsion, and sanctions means extermination. This is exactly what the Nazis were going to do to all the Jews of continental Europe and beyond. And this drives this terrible anti-Semitism that is going on today. We survivors who are experiencing this, we have seen this before. I knew 15, 18 years ago, I could see certain things that my guts told me that we're going down a bad road, and I will keep thinking. We've been talking for 30 years, and look where we are today. This poison is coming at us nonstop. I just saw a new thing coming out now. It's a revolutionary student movement, and not swastikas, but a sickle and hammer. It's against capitalism and Zionism. I keep remembering the late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who said, anti-Semitism is like a virus. It survives by mutating. In the Middle Ages, they hated us because of our religion. In the 19th and 20th century, they hated us because of our race. Today, they hate us because of our nation state. Israel, anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. So this is where it ends. So in 1939, Poland was attacked. The Polish Jews were put into ghettos. There were 3.5 million Jews in Poland, over 5 million in the Soviet Union. And we spoke about somebody who is here in Canada. These are the units called the Einsatzgruppen. These are voluntary killing units of the SS who volunteered to do this killing. The man in charge of these was Reichsführer of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. He spoke to these volunteer killers and he said, you are going to be the biggest heroes of the Reich, but nowhere in the annals of history will there be anything written about your heroism, because we need to keep a lid on this. We cannot expose this. The only thing you can leave anytime you want, but you have to swear that you're not going to take pictures. And they broke that because they took pictures of their killing spree. Over 2 million Jews were murdered by bullets. The order of the day was, by Himmler, 1 bullet per Jew, 1 Jew per bullet. Years ago, Father Patrick Dubois went to the Ukraine, Belarus, Ossetia, because he felt it was his brotherly duty to find these mass graves and designate them as a Jewish cemetery. There's no markers for these mass graves. He did this for 7 years. He found remains of almost 2 million Jews. And he was going to go back, but the problem was they would not let him go back. So this was too slow, killing people by bullets. So they came up with a powerful pesticide called Zyklon B gas, where they could kill Jews en masse by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions. This was Liberation Day in Auschwitz. January 27. These were the remnants that were found by the Red Army. These are people that are already half dead. They cannot be brought back to normal life because their internal organs are all gone. See, the irony was we were dying from starvation. And then after liberation, when they gave us food, it killed us. Here was a SS officer or found with a truckload of bodies. You see, there are no names whose brothers, whose sisters they are. Jewish life wasn't worth a plug nickel in continental Europe. A survivor with a tattoo number. As they say, there's no freedom without responsibility. I recall, I've seen Hitler making a speech in Nuremberg in the sports stadium, speaking to over 1 million people. They were ecstatic when they heard him. They were Sieg-heiling. They bought it and they got on board. So here is my town in Hungary. Today it's Slovakia, right here near the Hungarian border. Imagine in 1942, 43, 44, the last year of the war, when Hungarian Jews were deported, starting in April of 1944, in the last year of the war. We were going to celebrate Passover 77 years ago. And by some miracle, my father and uncle were home from their labor battalions. I don't know how they managed to do this. We had plenty of food. We had chickens, geese, and ducks. We had a large orchard. We were self-sufficient in everything except spices and a few other condiments. My mother was an amazing lady. She had a helper whose name was Anna. She came to live with us when I was born in 1929. And one of these racial laws was that Jews cannot employ non-Jewish people. In 1941, she had to leave. And she didn't want to go. She was a part of the family. See, we had a beautiful home, but we didn't have running water. We didn't have a thermostat for heat or air conditioning. We had a well in the yard. My mother had a big stove in the kitchen. And we had a Cappell oven, you know, a fireplace in every bedroom to keep us warm. So Anna played a very big part in my mother's daily work that she had to do. I think back, my mother didn't have a fridge. She didn't have a wash machine, a dishwasher. She made wonderful foods. How busy she was. She made all our clothes, our underwear. Women, they looked amazing. They were reading books. I don't know how much time. The Sabbath was the only day when they had a day of peace. They were dressed beautifully. They were all good. Seamstresses, you know. So in 1944, we were celebrating Passover. And we asked the questions, why do we eat bitter herbs? Why is this night different than any other night? And the father answers, it's because we need to remember how bitter it is to be a slave. And we say, all those who are hungry, come and join us at our table. This is called in Hebrew a Seder. And a Seder means the order of the dinner. For my family, this truly was the Last Supper, and for hundreds and thousands and millions of Jews, this was the Last Supper, never to be repeated ever again. We retired about 12 o'clock, and my grandfather, my father, and uncle were out in the yard. It was a beautiful, balmy night. Passover at that time was April the 4th, April the 7th, the first night of Passover. And my grandfather said, we were talking politics, and he said, if we manage to survive 4 to 5 months, we are going to be liberated by the Soviet army coming from the east. You see, we knew that the war was being lost. Hungary was allied with Nazi Germany. They were Axis powers. Many young men from the town died on the Eastern Front. Many came back without limbs. People were not happy. They realized that they were on the losing side, but the die was cast. And we retired about 12 o'clock, knowing that next morning we'll get up at a leisurely time and we'll walk to the synagogue. You know, we lived in this part of the world for 2,000 years. Jews have lived in that part of the world, which was the eastern province of the Roman Empire. It was called Pannonia. The Magyars came in the 9th century. That's how long Jews have been living there. I think the Romans brought Jews after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Jews were artisans, they could read and write. So they brought these people to do commerce. And early morning, our door was kicked in. 2 gendarmes are in our bedroom yelling and screaming. You know, Hungarian gendarmes are a very crude bunch. They wear riding boots. They have an old gun with a 2-foot bayonet fixed. They have a big black felt fedora with red rooster tail feathers. They're yelling and screaming, if you have any money or jewelry, hand it over. This is in your own home. You have 2 minutes to pack a bundle, they're taking it away. Total pandemonium. My mother, being a practical lady, she grabbed the baby. And you know, I keep thinking of my mother because it was truly the mothers that truly bore the brunt of these terrible things that were happening to us. A mother with a baby. And she was yelling at us to put on layers of clothing. My father said, put your winter boots on. See, my father knew that without boots, if you can't walk without boots, you're in big trouble. And he went into the quarters of my grandparents. My grandfather was 77. He was a big, strong man. And my grandmother was 75. My father was 42. My mother was 40. In this pandemonium, we had a big dog. He was an Alsatian. We knew that this was something terrible was happening here. He was barking his head off. The gendarmes started to kick him or shoot at him. He wouldn't stop. A neighbor came running in. Her name was Iliklinka, a Christian lady. And the gendarmes were yelling at her, get out of here. This is not your business. But she stood her ground. And she told my mother, Ethel, where are you taking this baby? Why don't you leave the baby with me? Imagine a mother stressed out to deal with this kind of a request. You know, I never had a chance to speak to my mother after that. I'm thinking that my mother left my baby sister, would she have survived? You know, in Poland, Jews were put into ghettos. And when the ghettos were being liquidated, they were being hauled to the gas chambers in Treblinka, Majdanek, Belzec, Skamno. Many Jews gave their babies to Christian families. There was a young nurse, Irina Senderova, who took out 2,500 Jewish kids from the ghetto in Warsaw, placed them with Christian families, and she had a record of every child. Had my mother left her, would she have survived? We'll never know. So we were, and this has to do with today, because about a month ago, I had a phone call from the Wiesenthal Center, and they said there's an email here from Slovakia, from my town, which is now called Moldova, not Bodvo. There was a river, Bodva. A teacher is asking the Wiesenthal Center, we are looking for a Mr. Tibor Eisen, that's my name. We want him to have a Zoom call with my students. I tell you, I was just floored. This is 77 years later. So what happened 77 years before? We were gathered in the school, 2 rooms, about 300 Jews. It was a terrible night. While we were sealed off in the school, every single Jewish home was ransacked to the bare walls. The synagogue was desecrated. The prayer books and Talmudic books were burned in a fire. The ark was broken. The doors were torn off. The Torah scrolls were taken out of the ark and cut into ribbons and worse. 300 Jews were assembled in the schoolyard that morning on April the 9th of 1944. The rabbi, who was an elderly gentleman, Rabbi Tenenbaum, was made to walk in front of the column. And the Jews left Sepsi in a Hungarian, never to come back. Imagine leaving your home, you're walking by your property. I could hear Farkas was barking his head off. We had a gated house with a big fence all around. They're put on a train and taken to a brickyard in Kasha, Koshice, the capital city of our province. 30,000 Jews were collected in this brickyard. In 1944, Hungary had the last number of Jewish people. 700,000 Jews lived in Hungary. In less than 3 months, 450,000 Jews were gassed, murdered by gas in Birkenau, Auschwitz II. Do you think that the Hungarians could have protected us those few months? And it's true, my grandfather was right. 4 months after we had been taken away, the Red Army entered to the Carpathian Mountains. 450,000 Jews were murdered. Arriving in Auschwitz in a cattle car after a 4-day journey, locked in. Can you imagine? My mother was holding a baby in her arm. We spent about 3 weeks in the brickyard. There was no food. Other mothers and my mother, they were breastfeeding these babies. They had no milk because there was no food, and these babies were simply wilting away. They were dying by the minute. My mother couldn't feed the family. Imagine what her feelings were. I'll never know. The doors were open in this cattle car, and we were ordered to get out fast, schnell, out, raus, schnell, out fast from the cattle car. It was the middle of the night, floodlit platform. Transport arrived. These transports were about 45 to 50 cattle cars. It was simply, this is how Hungarian Jews had to be brought in these numbers so that the gas chambers in Birkenau could be working 24/7. There was a selection on this platform. My mother holding a baby in her arm, and my grandparents and my aunts. These were people called whose lives were not worth anything. They were not. They were simply marched into a gas chamber. They told them that you're going for disinfection. Your bundles will be delivered to you in the morning. Can you imagine the deception that worked on this platform? My father, uncle, and I were selected for slave labor. Just looking at this map of continental Europe, imagine there were hundreds and thousands of locomotives pulling tens of thousands of cattle cars from Brussels, from Berlin, from Bratislava, Budapest, Bucharest, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Paris, Rome, all the way to Saloniki. Thousands of transports hauling their miserable human cargo to the east to occupy Poland. There was not a single sabotage in any of the railway tracks in all of continental Europe. You know, wherever these transports went through, they were standing at stations. You could smell them. People were screaming for water because the water was not replaced. Initially, they gave us a pail of water and a pail for a toilet. Transports from Saloniki, from Greece, when the doors were open, there were 2 or 3 people barely alive, and most of them were suffocated. Pictures are the biggest treasure that I brought with me from Canada to Canada. When our home was ransacked, Illy Klink, our neighbor, she managed to save 4 pictures. This picture was taken in 1938. My younger brother Eugene and my baby was less than, not quite 2 years old. And you know, I look at these outfits. My mother made all these outfits. These were our Sabbath outfits, you know, and it was before I had long pants, wearing short pants, and we had special shoes. She always made sure that we had high laced shoes so that our ankles would be strong. This was taken in our premises at a closed porch with grapevines growing here. And this was another picture that was taken in 1940 by the order of the police. I don't have a picture of my baby sister. This was taken in 1940, what a Jewish family looked like. My beautiful mother, and my father was a businessman. And these are the cattle cars that are standing there today on the track in Birkenau, Auschwitz II. Imagine a cattle car holding about 100 to 110 people. This is the entrance to the killing camp. This was the death camp, Birkenau, and partial labor camp. There was one track here. This was the main track. For Hungarian transport, they put in 2 tracks, actually. Track 2 and track 3. This was a huge guard house, machine guns and searchlights on top, double electrified wires. This was Birkenau, huge area with hundreds and hundreds of barracks. And this is the layout of Auschwitz, Birkenau. Transport arrives here. This was a killing place designed to kill, industrially kill hundreds of thousands of Jews. Crematory and gas chamber 2, 3, 4, and 5. And these were pits where they were burning Hungarian Jews. So we were selected. My father and uncle and I, we were taken from here to somewhere over here. Our clothes were taken away. Our hair was shaved. We were left with our boots. Women were processed in the women's camp on this side. Those who were selected for labor, their hair was shaved. And the next morning we were woken up. It was May the 8th, 1944. And we're looking at this huge place with hundreds and hundreds of barracks. We could see these 4 huge buildings with big chimneys, fire and smoke, and a terrible smell of burning flesh. This is what we smelled. We were naked. We had no clothes. 2 men in their striped outfits, they brought a canister of water and they gave us a ladle of water. My father asked them, are we going to see our families? You see the deception? The next day, we still thought that everything is okay. Are we going to see our families today? And they were laughing. They said, where did you come from? We came from Hungary. In 1944, you don't know what this place is all about. Your families have gone through the chimney. This was the lingo here. You'll die of starvation or beating, but you'll definitely go through the chimney. And I kept thinking, how does a person go to a chimney? Why? We're given tattooed numbers and outfits, and they asked for people who can do farm work. 100 of us were selected. They were taken down the road, 3.5 kilometers to Auschwitz I. And this is where I spent 9 months, working as a slave laborer for the Nazis. The only thing that I always said that this is the 4th season of camps, because these are military barracks, and we had indoor plumbing and indoor toilets. These buildings were built under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So we had all these facilities. In Birkenau, there was a wooden barrack, and maybe for 10,000 women, they had 1 or 2 wooden barracks as a toilet. Can you imagine? For 10,000 people, they didn't have facilities like Auschwitz I had. So imagine you're 15 years old and you're dumped into here. There are about 28 to 29,000 slave laborers here. Some of them are old-timers, hardcore people who have survived on 300 calories a day. Imagine living on 300 calories a day, doing 10 to 12 hours of hard labor, walking to the job site and walking back. How do you survive living on 300 calories? Do you have the will to survive? Your feet, your heels are a bloody mess. You have no underwear, you have no socks, you have no toilet paper, a toothbrush. You have nothing. You have a cap, a jacket, a pants, and your boots. And I was very lucky to have those good boots. My father and uncle were truly my guardian angels. I remember the first day we were out in the field and they brought this stinking mess of soup. There was everything in it that you could not even imagine. And I said, I will not eat this. My father simply crammed it down my throat. 3 days later, that soup tasted pretty good. The trouble was there wasn't enough of it. So here, to survive, you have to be very focused. You have to call on all your knowledge and know-how, the skills that my grandfather, my mother, my father hammered into my head. You have to use all those skills to survive here for second after second. There was no quarters given. I'm seeing the best and the worst here. People here would kill for a crumb of bread. They would try to steal your boots. And once your boots were gone, you received a pair of wooden clogs, and that was your end. It was a piece of 2x4 with a piece of canvas. We were together for 2 months. You see, every camp they had a big sign. It says, Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free. This was the slogan in every camp. So the Jews that worked in this shop that made this sign, you see the B is upside down? They were trying to tell us, don't believe what you see here. This is not real. The first day we came in here, there was an orchestra inside the gate here playing music. I said, what is this place? I love music. And you know something? That the music kept me alive here. When you went to work in the morning, when you came back, the orchestra was playing music. These musicians, they played their heart out because they could see how we were getting weaker and weaker. There was a women's orchestra in Birkenau. The conductor of the Birkenau Orchestra was Alma Rosé. She was a violin virtuoso. She was the niece of Gustav Mahler. They played their heart out. That was the only thing that was normal. In July of 1944, there was a selection. Now, by that time, we knew, by the next day, we knew what happened to our families. We didn't talk about it. We had to be so focused how to survive. It would have been very hurtful to talk about it. Imagine losing your entire family with one fell swoop. Nobody left. So in the middle of the night, the loudspeakers went on, the powerful loudspeakers that can cover this entire camp. And it says, Achtung, Achtung, which means attention, attention. All inmates from this barrack run naked to one of the buildings for selection. And my father and uncle and I, we were in different barracks. And next morning, I ran to their barrack before we had to stand up for roll call, and they were not there. And I had to go to my job sites. They were in a different work unit. And I came back in the evening, they were still not there. And I ran to a quarantine area. And I managed to see them only for seconds. And I knew that this was the worst. My father gave me a blessing through the barbed wire. And he told me that if I managed to survive, I have to tell the world what happened here. I was devastated. Never saw them again. So a couple of weeks after they were gone, I had a terrible hit on my head. You never know when a bad thing turns out to be a good thing. I lost a lot of blood. I was about, 8-9 kilometers away from Auschwitz I, out in the field. And I went into shock. I was thrown into a ditch. Once your feet were gone, you were finished. I lost so much blood. When you get a hit on your head, there are so many little veins that you're bleeding something terrible. And I kept thinking in this ditch, looking at the little world that I could see, the trees and the leaves. Is this the last time I'm seeing the world? How am I going to get myself out of this dilemma? I was brought back to Auschwitz I. I was taken to Barrack 21, which is the third row of barracks, way out at the other end. And there was a surgery department. I was dumped in the surgery department. There was a surgery simply because it was part of the deception. They brought the International Red Cross and showed them, look, we take very good care of our workers. And there were two surgeons. There were two Polish political prisoners, a Dr. Rojeszko and a Dr. Sobieskiego. They fixed me up and I was put up in the ward upstairs. The deal was that if you had 2 days grace, if you couldn't walk away, 2 days later, you were taken to the gas chamber. Well, I could hardly get up after 2 days. I was loaded on a stretcher. The truck was in front of the building. And Dr. Rojeszko pulled me off the stretcher. He brought me into the prep room of the surgery. And he gave me a lab coat. And he said, you're going to be the cleaner. And I worked for him for 6 months. And for 3 months prior to that, I was working outside in the field. Dr. Rojeszko saved my life. Dr. Rojeszko and his assistant, I found out later from the family, Dr. Rojeszko actually was the head of the underground right in Auschwitz I. He was a very well-respected doctor. And I had no idea what was going on there. The Polish intelligentsia, they had an underground working right out of Auschwitz I. So Dr. Osheshko, like every doctor, they swear the Hippocratic Oath that they will do no harm. They are healers, and this is what he did. I took part in many operations for the next, what was it? It's about 6 months. They are trying to take together people who were so far gone, beyond help, and they knew that 2 days later they'll wind up in the gas chamber. There were many other doctors by the hundreds, like Dr. Mengele, who swore the Hippocratic Oath, and they were doing terrible things to human beings. Experiments on twins. This is what Dr. Mengele did. He wanted to know how each German woman could have multiple births. I saw women who were given high doses of X-ray so they could never bear children. I saw many teenagers who were castrated. I saw vats full of body parts that were shipped from here to all the teaching universities in Germany and Austria, right here from here. I saw this with my own eyes. And I was here till January the 12th, 1945. We're taken on a death march. So this place was a place of industrial killing and stealing. They laid it out in the final solution in 1942. Reinhard Heydrich, Hitler's deputy, at Wannsee, they laid it out point by point how they're going to collect 12 million Jews from continental Europe, take away their properties, their businesses, their artwork. 12 heads of ministries all signed on. They're going to provide a rolling stock. They're going to take away their bundles, their clothing. They're going to find everything the Jews would hide inside their body, or bake in gold coins into a bread, or hide no matter where, even in a tube of toothpaste. Everything was examined, and they're going to knock out their teeth, the gold crowns and fillings, and the gold was melted down into bricks. And a man whose name, one of the sergeants, Oscar Groning, was called the bookkeeper of Auschwitz. He was taking the loot 2 or 3 times a week in his metal suitcase to Berlin, to the Reichsbank. And in this document, it said nothing will be wasted. Women's hair was shipped by the ton to the Reich. They made a roll of material you can see in the museum in Auschwitz, made from women's hair. Even the ashes will be sold as fertilizer. This was Auschwitz I. Can you imagine? The most cultured people in the world has created a terrible thing. And I will never get over this, thinking of my mother crammed in with 2,000 people with her children to suffer a communal death with thousands of people. Death in these gas chambers lasted anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes, depending on atmospheric conditions. This is what a ramp looked like, arrival, separation. They are standing there, they're very, like they're discussing the day. This is Dr. Mengele. This is Oscar Groning, a clean-cut guy. He's about 22 years old. He was being charged for being an accessory in the murder of 300,000 Hungarian Jews. And he said, I wasn't part of the killing machine. I simply followed orders. And he said, all those who say that Auschwitz didn't have a gas chamber, they're a bunch of dummies, like he did say. He said, I was there, I heard it, I smelled it, I saw it, but I wasn't part of the killing machine. He had a lot to say when he was very talkative during the court case. He said some terrible things. I was really in shock. And this was his comrade. He was in the um, Totenkopf division of the SS. You see that the Totenkopf means the death head units of the SS, skull and bones insignia, another clean-cut guy. They were both about 95, 96 years old. And they received 40 years, so they didn't spend it. And now in jail, they both died. So, you see, the Nazis, they were their own archivists and bookkeepers. There's a saying in German, Ordnung muss sein, order must be. Do you know that everyone that had a tattooed number, they had a perfect record, they had a punch card system. And this is how they knew of every single prisoner that they had in the camps. Here's my father, 9891, Eisen Zoltan, and my number is 9892, and my uncle. This was on July the 9th, 1944. This is a report to the SS Hygienic Department of the SS. They were taken away for examination for Streptococcus hemolyticus, never to be seen again. This is the women, Hungarian women. No underwear, the hair is shaved. You know, if you found a piece of rag to cover your head, you're very lucky. Some of them had sandals. They had to build roads, and I remember the sandals were cut up in strips and their feet were bleeding. They were guarded by women SS guards. Terrible. Women were the true heroines in the camp. These are the Sonderkommando. These are the workers that worked in the gas chambers. They were being rotated every 60 days because they didn't want any witnesses of what was going on here. And there was a David Olair, who was a Greek Jew, who managed to escape. He did a lot of these sketches, and they were hiding it in the crematorium area. And there were a lot of these he did in 46. You can see the production of hydraulic lift brings up the bodies through a hydraulic lift from the gas chamber. This is a trough of water that pushes the body and it floats up here, from here to the ovens. Very systematically built. This is Dr. Zheshko. I met the family in 2010. I brought a beautiful plaque to remember his memory of what he did. And I met his family. His two children, Jan, and his daughter, Danuta. And this is her husband, and these are their children. So that was an amazing event. This is the operating room, you see. We had no blood plasma, we had very little to work with. We had instruments, and the work was really difficult. We operated 6 days a week, many times in the middle of the night. But this saved my life. I was working from 7 o'clock till 12 o'clock. Thousands of instruments to be cleaned, dried, and brushed. All the bloody sheets to be taken next door to the laundry. We're washing next morning, picked them up, folded them, and sterilized everything. I had a system, I had the skill. This was Auschwitz liberated in 27th of January. This was the Death March. January 12, 1945. Left Auschwitz walking for 4 days and nights in January in bitter cold, exposed to the elements, and then into open flat cars to Dresden, Pilsen, Mauthausen, Melt, Ebensee. I arrived in Ebensee at the beginning of April 1945. There was no work here. This was Ebensee liberation, May the 6th, 1945. Some of these that could still stand on their feet. That's all they had is a rag. I was fled out in the barrack. I was suffering from typhus. Typhus was killing us by the thousands. We were infested with lice that burrowed under our skin. They carried bacteria from body to body. And on May the 6th, somebody shuffled in into the barrack and he was mumbling away that the guards are no longer in the tower, the SS guards. And I wasn't sure whether I was having a fever dream or should I heed this, what he was saying. And something told me that I need to crawl out. I was in the lower bunk. There were 2 dead people on one side of me and 2 dead on the other side. I had to crawl over these cadavers, and I knew instinctively that if I don't get out of here, it will be my end. And I could hear this heavy equipment coming up the hill. Seconds later, the gate came flying in. A big tank was coming through. It had a white star on it, and there were black soldiers sitting on the turret. This unit was called the 761st Black Panther Tank Battalion. They were attached to General Patton's Third Army. Johnny Stevens was a squadron commander. He liberated Avensday, Gunskirchen, and Mauthausen. I met up with Johnny post-war. And had they not come, had they been a half an hour later, I don't think I would have made it. It was that important. So we were liberated, but I wasn't free. It took me a couple of months to get out of the camp. And the camp was being locked down, and they said anybody that wants to go to Czechoslovakia next morning, be at the gate. 40 of us were put up on this big truck, army truck, and we were taken to Czechoslovakia. And it took me a month to get back to my home in Moldova. So this is my home. And this is our lady, our neighbor, Eva Klinka, with her little daughter. The home was a mess when I came home. It wasn't a home. It was a dead place. All the livestock were gone. There was a neighbor sitting in my mother's kitchen, wouldn't give me a glass of water. Ili Klinka moved from across the street in the middle of the town. And I went to see her, and she just screamed out. And she realized that I have to be taken to the hospital. And she gave me a bath and some clothes. And I was in the hospital for a few months. So imagine you come back, there's nobody there. You don't have any money. You have nothing. How do you pick up the pieces and how do you get started? So let's get back to today. This is what that home looks like today. It's a scrapyard. And I was here in 2019 with my son. The Shaw Foundation made a documentary here, the 360 camera. It will be coming out this year sometimes. It's a terrible thing to see your home a wreck. And I think it was sold. I could never recover my property. I wound up in an orphanage, and I arrived in Canada in 1949. And these are our great-grandchildren. Yehudit, she has the name of my little sister, Elisheva and Mikhail. And we have our granddaughter living in Jerusalem. Other one lives in New York. And our 2 sons living in Toronto. And we discovered my great-grandfather's grave. That is truly a miracle because many of the Jewish cemeteries, the stones have been either gone or broken down. So this is Tzvi Yaakov Jacob Eisen. And this is anti-Semitism in Toronto, you see. A few years ago, beside the synagogue, there was a poster, and it said the UJA, the Jewish Agency, we make Holocaust education happen. Somebody in the middle of the night painted this over my forehead, Achtung. Remember in Auschwitz, Achtung, Achtung for selection. Well, this was Achtung in Toronto. So I feel that this terrible anti-Semitism, it's a beginning of something bad, because this is exactly the way things started in Europe. And this is not a Jewish problem, it's everybody's problem. We need to stand up and do something about it. And if we don't, then unfortunately, we may be repeating the same old mistakes, and we haven't learned a thing from the past. So I just want to go back to my town. So I received this email. I sent an email to the teacher. I said I would be happy to talk to the students. And we set up a couple more Zooms to get to know each other. In fact, her grandmother lived on the same street as I. I don't think many people remember, not the Eisens, many others. There's not a single Jew living in Moldova. The city is now about 4 times the size it was before. But the synagogue is standing there while everything is grown all around it. They left the synagogue like a decaying building, like an orphan standing. And whenever I went back there, it really bothered me a lot. So the teacher sent a picture of her school, which is a new high school right behind the synagogue. And so here's the synagogue, a dark building, like a derelict, and her school was in the background. It was such a terrible juxtaposition. And I spoke to the students. They speak perfect English. And I said, this really upsets me. I said, whose responsibility is it to do something about this synagogue? They said, it's our responsibility. And apparently the mayor made a promise before I had contact with these people that they're going to do something with the synagogue. I hope so. So here I spoke to 200 students and told them about the Jewish community, what it was like 77 years ago. And I spoke to them on Passover, 77 years later. It was truly a historic event. And I think we built some bridges. And so I thought, how many times did this happen that a Holocaust survivor 77 years later was asked to come back to speak in his hometown to local students? So I'll leave my story here. I just want to say that we need to stand on guard for our freedom. And I always remember in Thunder Bay, I spoke to grade 10 students, and the student walked up to me and shook my hands and he said, Mr. Eisen, I promise you that I will stand on guard for Canada. So if we have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. Such a moving story, Max, and what a wonderful addition to hear that you were able to connect with your hometown. We do have a number of questions, and people are welcome to put more in the Q&A. So we'll take some time to answer those. Carolyn, did you pick a question already that you would like to pose on behalf of one of our attendees? Oh, you're on mute. Such fun with Zoom.
I do have a question. Sorry, I do have a question, and it is from one of my former students who's so wonderful, Emily DeBrun. She says, hello, Max. It is truly amazing to be able to hear you speak again. I was wondering if you would be able to talk about the trials that you gave testimonies at.
Well, the trial was, I had butterflies going to a trial of an SS soldier. An SS man in my eye was like, these were the supermen. And they had the right to simply grind us away, body and soul. You know, as a Jew in a camp, you were not allowed to look into the eyes of an SS man. When he stopped you, you had to look down on the ground, whip up your cap, and report A9892. That's my number, humbly reports. And here I was able to look at this old man who came in with a walker. And he was quite an ordinary old man. He was white hair, and he was not that threatening person. And simply being in a court, I remember the Hungarian interpreter. It was interpreted into many languages, from English to Hungarian to German to French or whatever. And the Hungarian interpreter, I met him after the day's events. He came up to me and he said, you know, I couldn't stop shaking all the time. I was listening and I had to interpret your story. It was an extraordinary event, and in a German court, a chief judge and two assistant judges and two civilians. It was called a tribunal. And I thought it was the right thing to do. And I remember the chief judge laid down the rules, what he is expecting and what he will not allow to happen in the court. No cameras and no flashes or anything. They had to leave before the court started. And he said, let's have a minute of contemplation. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. His name is Franz Kampisch. And I had a few minutes to talk to him afterwards because I didn't go back for the verdict. So, look, I knew that I knew the story here in Toronto with this person in Kitchener. It's too late, and a lot of them got away. I know that Simon Wiesenthal, he was a Nazi hunter. You know, he didn't hunt for them with a gun. He was through intelligence, and he brought 1,200 Nazis to court. But if you really know the story, that Iron Curtain came down, and all that sort of got washed away, and a lot of them slipped through the net, and but it was good at least to say that I think it's important that everybody has his day in court. I have many questions sometimes from students. Mr. Eisen, can you forgive? You know, that question comes up, and I don't know where that comes from, but I said, you know, I think everybody deserves a day in court. And so I think this was important. How much of a mark it leaves, I really don't know. It's, you know, time sort of, people are busy with other things, and whether they put a lot of weight on this issue, you know, you might hear some people say, oh, another Holocaust story. We were filming in Mauthausen in 2019, and somebody was jogging by, a gentleman with gray hair. He must have been in his 60s, and they had cameras and or microphones spaced out. And he walked by there, and as it happened, a German lady who was the head of the film crew, and he says, what is this, another story on the Holocaust? So, you know, that's the way it goes. And she explained what it is. And, you know, there's a lot of ignorance out there. People don't know. And we know that in Canada, 50% of the people don't even know there was a Holocaust. And it may be shocking to hear, but that's the bottom line. So we keep thinking that we've been educating for 30 years. So much work has been put in. And so here's a new group that's sort of raised its head. Revolutionary students movement, not a swastika, by the sickle and hammer against capitalism and Zionism. These are the new signs now springing up in Toronto. Where are these things coming from? Who is behind all these things? It's being overwhelmed. I know Mayor Tory said, we are spending money on the hate crime units, and where is all this coming from? Where is this hatred coming from? That's a big question, and this is what we're dealing with, and we need to be vocal. We need to say we will not allow this to continue, not in this school, in this city, in this town. There's this document called IHRA, I-H-R-A, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Many student unions are fighting against it, you see. Now that the universities should not accept that. So there's a lot of, we Jews have been we bore the brunt for many thousands of years. And so now they say, well, we're not anti-Semites, we are anti-Zionists, you see. It's like Lord Rabbi Sachs says, anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. So for some reason, in the Slavic language, there's a saying, Yagbida to Najida. If there is a problem, blame it on the Jews, you see. So we're in a battle, and we must win this battle. It's just like Winston Churchill said in the Battle of Britain. I keep thinking of Winston Churchill a lot these days. And I keep thinking of Viktor Frankl a lot these days. Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning. There you are. Everybody should read this because we are living through a plague, that has taken away our freedom. We don't have SS guards on top of us. But, we need to have our willpower, and we need to be very focused that we come out of this with all cylinders firing. Like Viktor Frankl said in his book, those that had a why, they found a how. Or if you had a why, you found a how. You have to be very focused, and you have to be in the camps. You have to have eyes in front of you and the back of you. And you have to be very resilient. And we have to do the same thing today to overcome this plague that we're going through now. And hopefully next time we'll talk to each other, we'll be free people. So.
We have another question from Stephanie Baldwin. I'll just read what she wrote in the chat. Dr. Eisen, I'm so grateful to you for sharing your story with us. It takes such strength to do that. As a grandchild of survivors, I feel an urge every day to keep any and every human being from such an experience. I worry about the stories we hear in the news about children being taken from their parents at borders and religious groups being persecuted and imprisoned. Sometimes it's so overwhelming, it's hard to know how to focus on daily work. When I feel I know others are suffering under similar circumstances as my own Bubby and Zadie. What work do you advise young people to do today to intervene for those in need?
Well, you can intervene the proper way, or you can intervene the other way, which is forcefully, which I don't agree with. You can speak up, you can speak out, you can write letters, and this is the way you can put your ideas forth and stand up and speak out, but not with force. So you need to sift through, we're living through a world today. We don't know whether it's true or not. We're living in a false information world today. And it's you have to be sifting through the information that you're getting very carefully. So that's my best advice that I can give you.
Max, there's so many great questions and comments here, and I'm worried we can't get to all of them, but I hope you'll get a chance to look at many of these comments because they're so wonderful. Jessica Parsons, also a former student, wonderful person, said, "Hi, Dr. Eisen. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us this evening. I was wondering if you could share some more about your experience filming the hologram and how you see museums using these resources in the future."
Well, that's a good question. I've seen a colleague of mine who has a hologram, and it sort of sends shivers down my spine. Here is a man hanging on the wall. And that sort of tells me that this will be later. I'll be speaking to you from the other side, so to speak, you know. And I think it's important, but I think it's important, you know, we need to have our own initiative and need to read about things. And maybe this will be the only way that they'll be teaching people. I don't know. And the Holocaust survivors our era is coming to a close in the next few years. We will not be here, and who knows what kind of world we're going to be living in. So we are hoping that this hologram will travel around and it will tell a story, and we'll be looking down at you and making sure that you're doing the right things. So to me, it was sort of creepy a little bit, but it was a very heavy work. I mean, a whole week sitting in a tent sort of and asked thousands of questions. It's a very difficult thing to make a hologram. They're working on it for a long time. It's about 2 years to produce it. And so a whole week of questions, 5 days. And look, if it will help, great, you know, it will be, you will decide, and your students and their children. This will be the only thing in books. I'm very happy that I wrote my book. I think I sort of lean more on books than on holograms, but it will be there. And this documentary, the 360-degree documentary, will be there for posterity, and that's it. Whatever tool we can help with, fine, you know.
We have an anonymous question asking you please to expand on what you mean by be careful what you buy. It's something that you said a few times in your talk.
Well, I mean, propaganda, you see, the Nazis were spewing propaganda. The Jews are subhuman. The Hutus were saying that the Tutsis are cockroaches. And today they're saying the Jews are this and that, you see. You need to be very careful what you buy. You see, look at the Nazi system. They sent the young kids into Hitler Youth, and they bent their brains, you know. They taught them, you know, to hate. You know that Hitler Youth kids had to go 3 times a week for meetings, and they even had to tell at the meetings of what their parents were talking at home, in their privacy. And they had the BDM movement for girls. So there is such things are happening today where children are being fed false information to hate another. And, you know, we Jews have experienced this lots, you know. And so that's what I mean. Be careful what you buy. You need to sift the information.
Thank you. Yes, we're dealing with a lot of challenges in people understanding about truth.
Yeah.
And finding the truth. Carolyn, maybe you want to ask one more question. I know there's so many, and I'm sorry we won't be able to get to all.
Yeah, it's so hard. And there was I just before I mentioned the question, there was a comment by Armand Labarge about just saying that, I'll read it very quickly. I had the experience of traveling to Auschwitz, Birkenau, Majdanek, and Plaszow with Max and the FSWC. While we were in Birkenau, a group of Israel Defense Force officers were touring the camp. And when they learned Max was a Holocaust survivor, they surrounded him and listened as he recounted some of his experiences at the camp. Many of them were in tears, and they embraced him and made sure he was afforded a seat of honor at the commemoration service held that evening. An incredible experience. That's something else, especially when you know how tough those Defense Corps guys are. But anyway, I wanted to mention that, but I do want to ask this question from Mark Wilson. He says, hello. Whoops, I've lost my thing here. Hold on. Sorry. 1 second here. Yes, sorry, the question keeps shifting around. Hello, and thank you for your presentation, Dr. Eisen. Do you feel that European countries have genuinely sought justice or adequately pursued criminals for crimes that were committed by Nazis and their allies? I read a story about a camp guard in the eastern townships of Quebec being deported a few years ago. It seems incredible to me that so many criminals escaped prosecution.
Well, that's true. A lot of them escaped. You see, world politics changed when the Iron Curtain came down, if you remember, post-World War II. There was no more collaboration between the Allies and the Soviet Union. So they were sort of going from one side to the other, and people were focused on other things. So that happens in every conflict, I think. There's always a network that manages to get their people out. And, they were very well organized, the Nazis. They had networks. They were able to funnel their people through Europe to Genoa in Italy and get them to South America. And they were very well organized. And everybody knew about that, and nobody stopped it. So all these things are happening in every conflict. And so it depends how many people are against those things, and many people have their own business to worry about, earn their livelihood. And so a lot of bad guys got through for sure. Yeah.
Max, you said only 50% of Canadians know about the Holocaust. Is that
Yes.
the statistic?
Yes.
I have to admit that boggles my mind. We have a question here from Hannah Schroeder. She says, thank you, Max, for your story. It is truly moving and an honor to hear you speak your truth. I am wondering what your thoughts are about 21st century movie adaptations of the Holocaust. Do you feel they are an accurate representation of what happened and are a good tool in teaching the public of the Holocaust?
Well, that's a difficult question because you can see a movie, it says boy in striped pajamas, for instance, which is absolutely not true. Or you can see Life is Beautiful, if you remember that one. Many Holocaust survivors were against it. I saw it and I was laughing and crying at the same time. So you have to learn. Movies can be bent whatever way you want them, and you need to read the stories from books. And I think I would depend more on books. For instance, The Schindler's List, very difficult documentary, and that had, I know that Steven Spielberg, he was directing this movie himself in Krakow, and he went into a depression, doing that. So, but you cannot make a movie of what really happened there, what the treatment of people was like. It was hell on earth, women and men. This was a horrible thing. In this cultured old world of Europe, 100 million people died in 2 world wars in this cultured world. So, and we keep thinking, here we've been educating for all these years, and every day, you know, there's a new something springs up and there's a new thing to fight. And we just we keep on going, you know. And so you cannot make a movie of what really happened there. You need to smell and feel it and hear it of what that place was all about. When you go today to Birkenau or to Majdanek, you see green grass growing. It's very benign. You cannot imagine what that place looked like during the camp life, you know. People were treated worse than, I mean, I just cannot describe it to you. It was, people would eat the bark of a tree. They were starved, they were filthy, there was no hygiene. And you cannot make a movie of that. It's impossible.
Absolutely. Carolyn, do you want to sneak one last question in, and then we're going to let Dr. Eisen have a pause?
Yes, and I apologize. There's so many great questions, and they're all coming in different order. So I really apologize for those people whose questions were not answered. There were some people that wanted you to talk about, Max, about what you think about Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. There are other people that wanted to ask about what would you say to your younger self today? People that asked about the orchestra. And there's this question from Haley Roy. She says, your memories and history are commendable. It's your talk is heartfelt and touching. You are remarkable, and thank you for taking the time to bring your story forward and sharing it with us. I guess my question is, as a survivor of the Holocaust, did your perception about humanity change after the war?
Definitely, we were outcasts. I mean, I came back to my town. There were no Jews. There were 20 Jews that came back, not at the same time as I did. We were considered, there were people who were saying, oh, who said that Hitler killed all the Jews? Look, there's another one coming. You see, that poison is there. And everybody thinks that they can simply treat Jews like the lowest of lowest. And this is sort of been the way for thousands of years. And in Europe, there's very few Jews left, and there's still a terrible anti-Semitism. Where is it coming from? And I just want to touch on the Palestinians. And in Israel, 20% of the population are Israeli Arabs of Muslim and Christian religion. They're 20% of everything in Israel, in the high tech, in medicine, and they sit on the Supreme Court, a judge. They have parties, political parties in the Knesset, in the parliament. There are Arabs who are consuls, generals. There are leaders in the army. There are Israeli Arabs. There are Bedouins. They are Druze, who are part of the fabric of Israel society. This is a fact. And little Israel is really the one that keeps the world going. That little country is among the top 5 invention countries in the world. They are helping farmers to increase their productivity by 50% in Asia, in Africa, in South America. This is Israeli know-how that is running the world today. Their inventions are absolutely amazing. They're helping the world. And I think, and Israel is making headway with many Arab countries today, and I hope that this will happen soon. And there are other Arab countries that they will not tolerate Jews. There's terrible hatred against Jews, and it's brought here to North America as well. And this is all well known. And I think we need to sit down and talk to each other and respect each other. Change this whole mindset. And it will be a different world out there. You know, it could be an amazing new world, you know, happening out there in the Middle East. If we can do that, you know, put away the guns and sit down and talk, that will make a big difference.
What a wonderful message to end on. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to everyone. I want to encourage everyone to read Max Eisen's book, By Chance Alone. There we go. Absolutely. And I want to invite one more person to speak to close out tonight. Dana Cappell is joining us. She is a fellow of Lady Eaton College and currently seconded to the Center for Teaching and Learning at Trent University as a senior education developer. Dana is also on the board of the Beth Israel Synagogue here in Peterborough, and I have invited her this evening to say a few words on behalf of the community.
Well, thank you so much, Christine, and of course to Max Eisen. I'm really honored to be here tonight on behalf of the Beth Israel congregation. Incredibly humbled to follow Dr. Eisen in speaking, and I'd just like to offer some words of gratitude. On behalf of the Beth Israel congregation, I first want to thank Dr. Christine Freeman Roth and Sylvia Dick and all of the staff at Lady Eaton College for all the work you've done to bring us together to learn from Dr. Eisen. Lady Eaton has demonstrated an incredible commitment to organizing speakers and events to help Trent learn about issues of social justice. And as a congregation, we're so grateful that you've always invited Beth Israel to join us. I also want to convey my thanks and the gratitude of Beth Israel to Dr. Carolyn Kay, who has worked tirelessly to promote the importance of Holocaust education throughout her teaching and has invariably used her understanding of the Holocaust to speak out against injustice. Carolyn has not only gone to incredible effort to bring Holocaust speakers to Trent each year so we can learn from them, but she's taken great care to include the Peterborough Jewish community in these talks so that we can honor those we've lost to anti-Semitism and educate our children about the past. And of course, I really want to thank everyone who's here tonight. Your presence signals to our very small Jewish community here that you support our identity and our safety. And as such a small community, a real good drive away from a larger Jewish centers, we are incredibly fortunate to have wonderful allies like Christine, like Carolyn, and like all of you here tonight. And finally, and most importantly, on behalf of Beth Israel, I want to give my most heartfelt thanks to Max Eisen. This is the third opportunity that I've had to hear Dr. Eisen speak. And on each occasion, I think like many of you, the power of his words has really taken my breath away. His story of the loss of his family makes me confront unimaginable grief. His story of the indifference of neighbors and townspeople really makes me confront the horrors to which perhaps I've been a bystander and encouraged me to be a friend to the powerless. And most of all, and in the context of the many stories that have emerged about police brutality towards people of color, his stories of the guards' cruelty and inhumanity have really pushed me to appreciate my obligation to always, always, always speak up in the face of injustice. I'm very grateful to hear these stories and consider their lessons, and it can't be easy for Max to recall and speak of such personal losses and horror. It's a real gift to us all. Now, I mentioned this is my third time I've heard Dr. Eisen speak. The first time was nearly 4 years ago when my son, who also happens to be named Max, and I listened to Dr. Eisen speak in the beautiful sanctuary in Beth Israel. And when Dr. Eisen concluded his talk, my son, who was 12 at the time, turned to me and said, "Everybody should hear this talk." And he was so moved by that, he went on to read By Chance Alone and later to devote his bar mitzvah speech to explaining what he learned from Dr. Eisen. In Jewish culture, we discuss the importance of ensuring that our traditions, our wisdom, our culture, our experience is passed on in Hebrew lador vador, from generation to generation. So Dr. Eisen, you could give me no greater gift as a parent than to have passed on this to my son. And you can give no greater gift to all of us here at Trent than to share your experience so that we can learn from it. I'll conclude with some of the final words of the Passover Seder. And as Dr. Eisen mentioned, this is a holiday that we just finished celebrating. And Jews around the world at the very end of the Passover meal say the same thing. Next year, may we all be free. And so, Dr. Eisen, on behalf of Beth Israel, thank you for sharing our past and for reminding us of our obligation to fight injustice in all of its forms, in hopes that next year we may all be free. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
so
doing it.
much. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, everyone who came out tonight. I wanted to mention that in lieu of a speaker's fee, we have made a donation to the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies in your name, Max. And we're putting up the link for all the attendees in the chat for anyone who may be looking to make a contribution for the continuation of Holocaust studies in Canada. Thank you to Dana and Carolyn for being a part of this evening, and to Max for sharing so much of yourself. We hope this evening sparks conversations in your homes with those you love, and stay safe, take care, and good night.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.